Welcome to Leadership Rules, where we believe leadership isn't just a title, it's a way of showing up in the world. Whether you're guiding a team, shaping a classroom, or leading your own personal growth, we're here to explore the rules that help you lead with purpose and impact. I'm Nick Caniglio, joined by my co-host, Marnie Stockman, and together we co-authored Lead It Like Lasso. And today, we're super excited to welcome a longtime friend and colleague to the show, Kellie Ady.
Yay! Oh, Kellie Ady. All right. So normally I would just read some LinkedIn type of stuff at this point, but I'm going to tell you how I met Kellie. I was just fed up with the job. I was going to get myself fired if I didn't quit. And I called a former boss and said, "Can you or one of your friends hire me like next week?" And the conversation went with, "I need you to meet Kellie Ady. I think you could be the other Kellie Ady." I was like, I don't know what that means. And if you were anybody other than yourself, me being told to be the other version of you might not have played so well, except, oh my gosh, all right, our backgrounds. So you were you were math, English. Sorry, I was the math teacher. You were the English teacher, secondary.
Correct.
Then we
Yes.
both went to the board office.
Mhm.
And you did IT, technical implementation, director of technology, whereas I was on the assessment side of the house. You went and worked with the software company, Schoology, that you had implemented in your school system. And I had gone and worked for the company, Performance Matters, that I'd implemented in our school system. And then I found you in Schoology, where everybody would meet me and say, like, "Oh, you're the other Kellie Ady. Like you're the assessment Kellie Ady," which I think is fantastic. And again, I don't know that my ego always could have taken that, but because it's you and you are amazing, and always bring like humor, solid advice and strategy to anything. Like I think we clicked right away. So I'm excited to have you here, and I was super excited to find you there. So
Oh,
welcome.
well, thank you. Thanks, Barney. That's a little bit disturbing, actually, of the other me. Like, but yeah, it was one of those, I think, unique experiences in your life you have where you meet somebody who is, for whatever reason, just clicks with you immediately. I'll always be forever grateful that you were told that, despite the fact that it makes me super uncomfortable.
I hear you on that. It was yeah, that was a whole new world, but I feel like you were part of saving me right from where I was. So I'm super appreciative. So we always like to start off with some biscuits with the boss questions. So I'm going to let
Oh,
Nick take it from
okay.
here.
Yeah, you ready, Kellie?
Maybe.
Okay, let's start with an easy one. So,
Okay.
first concert or favorite concert you've ever been to?
Oh, well, first concert was actually the Eagles, but I was too young to remember it. So I don't count that one. But my favorite concert was probably seeing the Foo Fighters at Wrigley Field
Nice.
back in 2018. Yes,
Love
that
So
was
that.
amazing.
Kelly's got a really cool background that involves concession things um, in sports stadiums. Right?
Yes.
Like, am I right? I'm like, I am remember that correctly. So,
Yeah.
morning person or night owl?
Well, now,
Yeah.
morning
Well,
person.
it's morning right now
20
because you
years
made me
ago?
sign up on East Coast time.
Yeah,
What
20
is
years
the
ago.
age
No.
threshold for that? I think there is an age threshold, and I
Yeah,
know I've passed it.
40. And once
Yeah.
I hit that, it was like, I'm in bed by 9. So yeah, if I'm lucky.
Okay. Mountains or beach?
Why not both?
Oh, I like that answer.
But I would skew towards beach just because I live in Denver.
Yeah.
So I get the mountains all the time. I don't get the beach very often. So it's probably location bias, but I still would prefer both.
Do you have a favorite Ted Lasso quote or leadership quote in general?
Um, Probably, but I can't think of it right now. Favorite quote. Well, it's hard for Ted Lasso not to just glom onto the whole idea of believe.
Yeah.
I feel like that just ran through the whole thing. So I don't know if that's a quote or just like a concept that stuck with me. But probably my favorite quotation, or one that really stuck with me, came out of the practice of adaptive leadership from Hypotelinsky. And it's actually about change. But it was this idea that change is really about loss and not about resistance. So people don't resist change because they fear it. They actually fear losing something. And that like changed my whole perspective on leadership, of thinking like, when there is resistance, what is the fear of what's being lost versus I just don't want to do this. So that's one that's always, I think it's always in the back of my mind.
I like that. I feel like we might dig into that a little bit more as we continue this conversation. Last one. When it comes to leadership, is it more art or science?
Well, I'm going to go back to my beach and mountains response, which is both.
It is. Yeah.
But I feel like it's more art, honestly. I think it skews towards art more than science. Otherwise, there are people that on paper should be fantastic leaders and somehow aren't. For some reason, there's a quality missing, or there's whatever it is, whatever you know when you see it is more to me the art. And that's also probably going back to my background, as Marnie talked about, as an educator, much more about like the art of teaching sometimes than it is the science.
Oh, totally agree. So we want to dig in, and for sure, one of the things when I asked you if you would join us today, and said like, what do we want to talk about? I think you'll find this thread as we talk through today. You're like, well, you know me, change management is something I love to talk about. So that will definitely be a thread. I think of that, and then the planning cycle that
Yeah.
you always talk. Like those were the two visuals that I think of when I think of you, which is kind of odd. Like, what framework do you think of when you think of somebody? Well, I've got two graphics in mind for Kellie Ady, and one deals with planning cycle. So, but we're going to start with a little bit about just leadership in general. So, what's the most powerful thing a leader can do to build trust in times of change?
For me, I would say it's having a really, really strong communication plan, which sounds simplistic, but another quotation that I tend to fall back on is one from George Bernard Shaw, of all people, who said the biggest issue with communication is the illusion that it has taken place. And I feel like we often fall back to say, we've already talked about this, or as I shared earlier, and that doesn't mean that it was actually absorbed earlier. And so I think because change can be such a daunting process, the more you can communicate constantly with people about where you are, how they're feeling, having good feedback loops, to me, that's the most powerful thing about building trust, because then people feel like you trust them enough to share what's happening. I think we've both been, and I'm sure Nick, you have as well, part of change processes where you weren't sure what was going on, and it increases the level of discomfort, which then leads to breakdown, I think, in trust in the process and also the person leading the change.
Yep. No doubt. And I have, and I know you guys have, and I know, Kellie, that you've led through corporate acquisitions, you've led through district shifts. What have you learned about helping people to help them navigate through that change without losing who they actually are, without losing their center?
I think one thing, and I'm going to rely on some research that's primarily come out of learning organizations. There's a model out there that's probably not familiar to most people called the concerns-based adoption model. And really what that does is look at the emotional reactions of change as kind of the center of it, which I think is an element we often miss. So I think that we often, as leaders, think tactically about change and think about process. And then the people side of it, which is really where the heart of it is, sort of falls to the wayside. So one thing that I really like doing is taking a look at what we can predict people will go through naturally as they progress through a change. And according to this model, if you don't handle this properly, people get stuck. And so if you can't get them past certain stages of where they are emotionally with the change, you'll never see it actually come to fruition and have them fully adopt or start to leverage a new initiative, a new technology, whatever it is. So I think one of the biggest things to do is recognize the emotional aspects of it. And then that's where their center is. And so they don't lose their center if they feel like you're empathetic to where they are at that moment. So, tailoring communication around which stage they might be in is incredibly important. Or even thinking about, if we call it training or staff development or whatever you want to use for a term, if you can also map that to where people are on those stages, it helps them progress through without feeling like they lost themselves somewhere in the middle.
So 3 thoughts came to mind on that. Yep, that's where we are today. So the first is, all right, now I've got to have a third model when I think of you. I'm going to need a graphic for the concerns-based
I
adoption
have
model.
one for you, shockingly. Yes.
Second, when they say I'm the other Kellie Lady, I'd like to say the dumber Kellie Ady, because I think that was all really smart, and I was glad I didn't. Yep, there could have been some intimidation there, because I think that was really important. And then third, how close is the concern-based adoption model? The way you described it, I felt like the stages of grief, in a mini way, go along with that change.
I think they do. I think what's different about the way the concerns-based adoption looks at the progress versus kind of the grief stages, which I actually think is also instructive. But the thing I liked about the breakdown of the stages, and this is hard to describe verbally, but there's like a chunk of stages that are very much about you as the person. So like, what is this? How do I learn more about it? What does this mean for me personally? And then it shifts to looking at the task itself. And I feel like the grief stages are really good for the emotional aspects that you keep going through, but it stays there. And I like how the concerns-based model moves from personal to then how do I actually manage the task at hand, to then how do I collaborate with others to refine this. And so I think you could use them in tandem, but I kind of like the progress of me, it, and us.
Oh yeah, I like that. So have you ever had a change that you kind of resisted that ended up teaching you something about yourself as a leader? I know I'm like, when I asked that question, I think we both might be thinking of one in particular time
Yes,
we experienced together. But
we
maybe you
may.
have something you want to share.
Well, there are multiple times. It's funny when I think um, about you saying that I was, using humor, and I always think of sometimes I can approach things as not only is the glass half empty, but this is not the drink I ordered. And so I'm trying to get better about that. I haven't quite succeeded, but when I think about a change that that was thrust upon me, and I'm actually not going to go to the example that's in your head, Marnie.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But
I figured we weren't.
we had a rollout. It was a disastrous rollout of devices for teachers, and I was in a position at that point of supporting technology to school level. So we roll out these devices, and these are for teachers. And I don't know if you remember netbooks.
Oh yeah.
This was like a 7-inch screen. And immediately all of us were like, this is too small. Like you can't even type on these, because they were made for kids. The idea was actually good behind it. It came from a very positive place. We want to roll out devices for kids. Let's start with teachers first and get them comfortable. The problem was the wrong device was chosen. All of us at the school level pushback, like this is not the droid we're looking for. And it didn't matter. Like the decision was made anyway, and it did not go well on any level. And we even tried to champion it. We tried to, rah, like, hey, we all get these devices. But I know sometimes resistance can be felt without being said. And I'm sure I'm not a good poker player, so I have no idea how I actually presented that change. But it really made me cognizant of the importance of buy-in from the people that have to actually roll out the change. So, and that gets back to that whole adaptive leadership thing of like, we treat things sometimes as if you can do it by edict versus by leading and helping people see value. And that was a tough one. So I learned a lot from my own feelings of change in that particular situation.
Well,
How did that situation end up? Just out of curiosity.
Not well.
Yeah, complete failure.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think one of the devastating things about that particular rollout is it caused a lack of trust for the entire staff of a district, that their needs were not being listened to or met, not just from our resistance, but it took a long time to regain the trust of faculty. And that meant that every time we had to roll out something, we had to be really cautious because we still were fighting with some PTSD from the other one,
Yeah.
which is actually why I got so fascinated by change process. Because I was like, we blew this here, and I want to know why, and how can I not do that? How do I avoid that in the future? So,
Yeah. Yeah. Another check mark against edicts, right? And just because we said so, do it. Because it's not just, you're not just putting the existing initiative at risk. Like you said, you end up putting future initiatives because you end up eroding that trust for sure.
right.
So we're going to switch gears a little bit. So shameless plug here, our book, Lead It Like Lasso. We talk about this notion that leadership is life, and more specifically, everyone's a leader. You know, it doesn't matter if you're in a boardroom, locker room, classroom, or even your living room. You know, everybody has a role in leadership. So one of the things we ask a lot of our guests is, you know, what is one thing an individual can do to shape culture if they don't have a formal title, or, you know, they're not listed somewhere in the org chart that indicates that they have any sort of power?
Well, I swear to you, the answer that I have in my head for that question is not informed by lead like Lasso. However, I do love that. Actually, the first thing that came to mind when you asked that question is positivity,
Yeah.
which actually is ironic because sometimes I can skew negative. I know that about myself, and so I have to work at that. But I feel like when you're positive, even if you don't agree, and we're not always going to agree, but if you can be really positive about your perspective and about what's possible and come with solutions and really try to just be maybe not the cheerleader of change, but the cheerleader of people, then I think that's probably the biggest thing I would say is that's kind of a power move. It's just the power of positivity, because that if everyone feels good about being around you, you have influence that you don't even recognize, I think.
Yep. Yeah. And I think we often talk about this whole notion of a counterexample. And the counterexample to positivity, and just came to my mind, is, you know, we have a saying, don't admire the problem. And a lot of times people just admire and kind of load into the fact of negativity or pessimism or something to that effect. And you may end up shaping culture in that regard, but you're not shaping the culture that people want to be around. So I really love that answer of positivity, for sure.
So when we first met, right, we both had roles as consultants in the company. I felt like we were internal and external consultants, right? We didn't have a line of folks under us that reported to us. And then when we, got acquired, same thing, right? We
Yeah.
were leading districts, we were leading teams that we weren't even in charge of. So I consider it like mentoring or consulting or advising, as opposed to just having the title bit. But so in all of those roles, like whatever you choose to call that, because I watched what you brought to the table and what you brought for folks at Schoology. So I know for a fact that they considered you to be a mentor, an advisor, et cetera. And what's something you always hoped that they would walk away believing about themselves, from how you interacted with them?
I think I don't know if I would think about it in terms of believing about themselves as much as I would hope that they had a belief in themselves. Because
Mm.
I think sometimes when you're mentoring someone, part of it is trying to combat the self doubt that people naturally seem to have. And I feel like if you can help people understand that you actually believe in them and that they're worth believing in themselves. I mean, I think all of us have struggled at some point, and this for me surfaces every now and then. This whole idea of self sabotage kind of can rear its ugly head, and how can you help somebody believe in themselves enough that that voice that they hear about the positive parts of who they are and what they can do can help drown out the natural things that we do to question ourselves, or to have imposter syndrome, or whatever the specter is in the room, for those that you're mentoring or working with.
I feel like you're speaking to me, Kelly, and I think it's a good lead in to my next question. I've had the fortunate opportunity to work with Marnie for many years now, as you have as well, Kelly, and it it never surprises me how much she kind of has influenced what I thought about leadership, and belief in myself was one big thing. So I'll lead into this question with that, right? Which is, have you ever run into a situation where you've been working with a colleague or a student or a teacher, what have you, and it it fundamentally gave you a shift and it made you rethink about how you approach leadership? Any examples come to mind with that?
When I think back to my time at the school level, I'll start there because I feel like I was on the ground a lot more. At the district level, I felt a little bit more removed from what was happening day to day. And there are always people that are the yes buts, where regardless of how good an idea is, they have an impassioned counterpoint and are often very vocal about it. And this is probably true in other sectors, but in the education sector, it permeates every department. And I had some folks in the social studies department, and they were fighting me on whiteboards, not interactive whiteboards. I'm just talking about the things you use with dry
Whiteboards.
erase marker. And it was you will pry this out of my cold, dead fingers. I use chalk and I have specific uses for colored chalk. And so I was complaining to my mentor at the district level. And his response to me was, sometimes you have to spend your time among the living. And it bothered me because I was like, but how do you know when to call it? How do you know when to say, like, okay, we've used the paddles, it's not working? So I sort of didn't take that advice. And it turns out that within about 4 years, that same group of people who had pushed back at every point were the ones who were asking for document cameras and the ones who were starting to use the carts more often. Like, I saw a measurable change in their behaviors. And I think what that changed about my perceptions of leadership is that sometimes change is happening, or what you're trying to lead is actually working and it's not visible. It's sort of hidden. So all of a sudden and this happens with kids all the time. You have them in class, and then 5 years later, they come back and say, "Oh my gosh, you changed my life." Well, you don't always see that at the time. And so it made me understand or try to be more cognizant of patience and time, and that those are needed. And sometimes the people you think aren't among the living, there's still a heartbeat there. You just have to give it some time.
Oh, the old dreaded patience thing again. Rearing its ugly
And
head.
yeah, and that's again a struggle for me.
I,
So
that's why I'm the other Kellie Ady. You and me both. So we always like to ask folks if there was a trick play or a life hack, right, called the Kellie Ady, or a leadership rule that you like to follow.
oh,
What is a leadership rule that you feel like everybody needs to know?
I'd be curious to know, if when you ask this question of others, if they typically name something that they have struggled with themselves. Because when I think about, like, what would my hack be, it's actually a hack I haven't quite nailed. And so, but I think everyone should do it, including me. Because I guess I have to remember also, everybody's the star of their own show. And
Mm-hmm.
like, the other people around you are not the extras, and they're not your best supportings. They are also starring in their own show.
You have met my daughter. That's not how she is. But go on.
Yeah, I have met Josie. I think one thing I would say is as a hack is to somehow figure out how to be the calmest person in the room.
Mm.
I actually made stickers that went on some of my work notebooks that just had CPR, so that I could look down, and in times of like stress, or like when I was feeling myself reacting, uh, just to remind myself, be the calmest person in the room, because I struggle with that. I think as an ancillary, like a side hustle for that, I would also kind of go back to Franklin Covey and that whole idea of seek first to understand. He has a second part to that, and then be understood, seek to be understood. I actually think you should just cut it off at seek first to understand. Because I think too often we skip that, and you can't be the calmest person in the room if you don't seek first to understand.
I love that. I could have used that sticker. Still could probably use that sticker. I always wrote KYMS, which is just keep your mouth shut. I had to get very tactical. Like, all right, I'm not going to be calm. I can at least be quiet.
I like that. I'm going to add that, Marnie. I'll have a new sticker made because I
Corollary.
still have the
Just
CPR
in
sticker.
case break glass is just shut your mouth.
Well, this is also the first time that we got a side hustle off of the leadership role. This is momentous. Thank you, Kelly. You're setting the bar high for the people that come after you. All good stuff, Kelly. We cannot thank you enough for having this conversation with us. It's something that I'm going to re-listen to for sure, because you threw out a whole bunch of stuff that made a lot of sense to me. So thanks for joining us. We'd love to know, if people wanted to reach out to you, get in touch with you, is there a best way to do that?
I'm on LinkedIn, so it's probably easiest. And I'm also on X, but I have I'm not on there very often anymore. But I'm at Kellie Ady, like the number 80 on X. And then for LinkedIn, it's just Kellie Ady.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Thanks, Kelly.